Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight for this webinar on studying in Europe. Hopefully, over the course of the next 30 to 45 minutes, I'll be able to offer you some useful information that will help you, your students, or your child make some good decisions about what university options are available for you. As this webinar is being recorded and to conserve bandwidth, I would ask that you can please stop your video from showing using the controls that you will have through the Zoom technology, and also to keep your microphone muted for the duration of this webinar. My name is David Hawkins. I am a specialist in international university applications, supporting students all over the world in applying to universities outside their country of education. And it's my great pleasure to be able to share some information with you this evening that may be useful to you moving forwards in this process. I won't take any questions during the course of this webinar, but my contact details are on the screen now and will also be at the last slide that I'll show in this webinar to enable you to get in touch with me directly if you do have any particular questions. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is actually to give you some idea of how I would like people and students and those on this webinar to consider international universities. And those who may have heard me present before or joined me for a previous webinar will know that I pose this question. But for those of you who are new, I would ask you to think of an analogy. And the analogy I have is this idea of the word football. When you talking in the UK or European context about the word football, we're going to think of something that looks something like this. It's going to be 11 players v 11. The ball will be round. We are trying to kick the ball into a goal in order to score enough goals to win the game. And that word football in the context of the UK and Europe and many other parts of the world may conjure up this particular image. But it's a word that is subject to different contexts. And if we were in a different part of the world, for example, the United States, we might see this image of American footballers playing a very different kind of game. But that same word football is still used to describe this sport. Equally, also, this sport, Australian rules football, and indeed this sport, Gaelic football in Ireland. And the reason I'm showing you these pictures and talking about this analogy, before I get into any detail about studying in Europe, is to ask that those of you who are listening tonight to try and not perceive the universities and the systems I'm going to talk about as if they were the same kind of universities that you might already be aware of. Just as there are many different ideas of what that word football means, depending on the cultural context of the people you're talking to, so there are many different ideas of what university can be. And it's a really important thing when you start to consider universities outside of the country or the culture from which you are from, to not bring that cultural background that you have when judging different universities. It's really important, particularly when we're talking about Europe, whereby actually I'm talking about a region with many different countries and many different styles of universities within it, rather than actually talking about individual countries that will have particular nuances of their systems. So the idea and the importance of this analogy is to explain that we need to understand these universities on their own terms as to how they select students, how their systems are run, the outcomes that students will have, rather than looking at them as different versions of UK universities or US universities, or whatever it is you might be used to yourself. So the key thing I want to cover to start in the first point then is to emphasise it's not like applying to UK universities. I know that most of the people signed up here are from the UK and will have detailed knowledge of this. And I want to spend a few minutes just delving into some of the key reasons why international universities in general, and indeed European universities in particular, have some characteristics which will mean that the process is going to work quite differently from if you did apply to the United Kingdom. And there are 5 reasons why it may indeed be different. One of the first things to bear in mind is that in some of the systems that we're going to be looking at, you may not actually have to decide what you want to study at that university before you apply. Now that's something that's very specific to particular contexts, indeed UK universities, whereby the system is designed to ensure that you go to university to study one particular subject. And some of the options that I'll discuss later on in this webinar will be based on a different model where students will go to university not as a potential student of a subject, say business or engineering or French, but will just go to university to study a much broader curriculum and potentially specialize in one area or a series of areas, but continue to have a broader curriculum than might be common in many other systems. You will also find in universities in other countries outside the UK that it might not be all about lectures and exams. And there are many different forms of assessment and teaching across the European university spectrum, which can suit different students in different ways. A key thing when we start to look into some European university systems is that the British model, whereby your predicted grades will be the key determining factor as to where you can apply, doesn't always follow when we look at European universities. And you will see some very high quality and well-regarded universities with what might seem as relatively low entry requirements. Now, for those born and bred and raised in the UK system, whereby the grades needed to get into university are almost a shorthand as to how good that university is, that can feel quite countercultural. And as I'll explain later, you might see some excellent universities asking for C's or D's at A level, but they're selecting in a slightly different way. And therefore, the predicted grades won't always be that key factor. Another point to bear in mind is that some of the university systems I'll be discussing may really, really care about things beyond your schoolwork when deciding who to admit that university. Again, in the UK context, when you're looking at your UCAS statement, it's a relatively small component of that piece of writing which is going to talk about things that aren't to do with academics. In European university systems, it could be very commonly the case that you're going to write a lot about things that aren't to do with academics. And at some of the university systems I will delve into, the other things that you can bring to an application beyond your schoolwork are going to be the key factors as to whether you are admitted or not. And then this last one is an important factor, and something that I think a lot of schools and students and parents are particularly concerned of, is that if I don't go to a top university, if I don't go to a university that people have heard of, will I get a good job? I think this is something that is a generational issue, and something that maybe 15 or 20 years ago was a very important factor, that a small proportion of students in the United Kingdom went to universities, and therefore going to a particular name university really was your passport to a job for life. The world has changed. The world is much more global. HR departments for big employers are much more aware of the variety of different experiences, and indeed university rankings of different varieties are comparing the quality of universities around the world. So if you are looking and hearing about universities tonight that are new to you, and you are nervous about whether that might be something that's going to have an impact on your career in a potentially negative way, I would reassure you that there are many, many students around the world heading to international universities outside their country and are having very good outcomes that are going to ensure that they do get a good job and are able to be successful in those first years of their career. So there are a number of countries in Europe that students are looking at, which are very popular, and I list some of them in here. And it's important to bear in mind in this, and just to emphasize it, that we are talking tonight about university courses in Europe that teach in English. You'll see from the list of countries here that most of these are not English-speaking countries. But English, in the ironic phrase, has become the lingua franca of higher education. And so across Europe, you can study a degree taught entirely through the medium of English in a country that is not in itself an English-speaking country. That's most commonly seen in the Netherlands, which those of us who work in international higher education will have seen a rapid growth over the last decade of the number of English-taught degrees in the Netherlands. And those of you on the webinar tonight who might have spent any time in the Netherlands will also realise how widely English is spoken in that country as well. So these countries listed here are some of the most popular options for students looking to study in Europe. But indeed, there are many other countries, and a selection of them are displayed on the screen now, which are also offering a variety of degrees taught in English. So there really is a huge variety out there for students who are looking to explore the European option for their university pathway. Before I delve into some of these things, though, I do want to look at why students might consider a degree taught in Europe. And there are some key reasons that students look to Europe, and some actual real important benefits that can help those students when they're considering this option. Through the European Union, we have a European higher education area. And a number of years ago, a thing called the Bologna process harmonized the European higher education area actually across 48 countries. Through the involvement of ministries of education and other international organizations, they standardized a variety of different ways in which university degrees were structured into a 3-cycle system, whereby students will study first for a bachelor's degree, then if they wish, go on to a master's degree. For those then looking to continue their studies to a very academic level, will go on to a doctorate. Now, this European higher education area has strengthened quality assurance across the wide range of European countries. And by having this standardized level of quality and involving ministries of education in these discussions, They have ensured that there is an easy recognition of qualifications and period of studies for students going within the European higher education area, transitioning between universities at different stages of their education, and recognising the national secondary education systems of different countries as a way of entering universities in a different country. And there are indeed actually a number of benefits beyond that of this European higher education area. Certainly for students who are entering the European higher education area without an EU passport, once you are into the Schengen area of visa-free travel, you've got a massive variety of cultural diversity within there that you can experience. So a student coming to study in Europe, say for example in Milan, will be able to travel very widely within other countries during their holidays, during their weekends, and indeed to do exchange programs and internships within that Schengen area. That leads on then to accessibility to the European labour market. So students who has taken a university degree in one country will then have access to the European labour market in a wider area. An important thing also of benefits of the European higher education area is the ECTS, the European credits, where students are able to take their credits from one university gained over a period of 1 or 2 years. And assuming things do match up in terms of subjects, transfer those to another university to continue their studies. One of the things that I will touch on looking as we go through the processes later on is that we are able to talk through the different processes that enable students to perhaps combine degrees in a different way. Another thing that we see as a benefit of the European higher education area, linking actually to the secondary education systems of a lot of European countries, is there is a very big focus on theory-based learning and also practical-based learning as two equally valid methods of study. And I'll talk a little bit later in detail about two different types of universities that can suit students who may be more used to suited to a theory-based model, or indeed those suited to a practical-based model. And then more widely, for students who are coming to study in Europe, we do start to see that they can access many things outside of the classroom that will indeed be beneficial to them. The diversity that they are going to experience as students studying in Europe and the ability to travel within countries and across Europe is going to be huge. That students can be skiing in the Alps, they can be surfing out in Barcelona, they could be eating gelato in Italy, they can be heading up to Scandinavia. The diversity of people and experiences and languages is going to be vast. The quality of the education system is internationally recognised, and there are very historic, very well guarded, and very well ranked universities that have international reputations that students can take with them into the career pathways. The access to foreign languages and cultures, and to learn these foreign languages and become more culturally competent in international settings, is a clear benefit of studying in Europe. And that will lead on to opportunities for further studies and careers for students as they are moving forwards. So as well as in those benefits of the European higher education area, there are across European universities some common things which it's important to be aware of. And there are some basic things which are common across the system that it's worth me touching on now. Traditionally within Europe, as in the UK, it is a focused degree. It is a degree where you are studying one or two closely related subjects for the duration of the degree. There are some liberal arts style courses with a broader education, and I will talk a little bit about those later. But typically speaking, in Europe, as in the UK, you will be applying to study a subject for the duration of your degree. A second thing to bear in mind is there's a very different culture at a lot of European universities, particularly the public universities, about housing. With European universities relatively cheap compared to other countries, comes a tradition of accessibility. The universities are kept at a low level of tuition by the governments of those countries to mean that many more students are able to access the university in their own town, city, or region. What that means in many European countries is that students don't actually travel away from home to study at university. And so you will find at many public universities that housing is not provided. There is a wider part that comes with that about the level of support that can be provided. But it's important for students who are looking to study in Europe that actually there may not be dorms or hall residence at some of the universities that you'll be considering. The ECTS credits are something I've touched on just now, but different universities will be specifying how many credits students are gaining in a year, depending on the length of their degree, and how those credits will add up to form a degree. And if students are looking to be flexible within their studies, this ECTS system is something that's really important to give commonality across the European higher education area. Applied sciences and research universities are these two different types of universities. Applied sciences focusing on practical education and research universities focusing on theoretical education that you will see in almost every European country. And in a slide slightly later on, I'm going to touch on that in a bit more detail. Degrees in Europe tend to be 3 or 4 years long for a single bachelor's degree, though there are some university systems that are offering dual degrees where students can study for 5 years or indeed sometimes more and get 2 degrees at the same time. A key thing that we'll touch on later, particularly with the example of the Netherlands, is the difference between getting into university and staying in the university. And I mentioned a few minutes ago about the tradition of accessibility, that the universities are so heavily funded from taxpayers' money by the governments of a country, that students who do graduate from school, who do complete their secondary education, have a right to access university. So what you will see when you look at university systems in the public sphere across Europe, relatively low entry requirements, and students are able to try almost any subject they would like to and have a go at university. Now, because of that tradition of accessibility, what you can also see, though, is that the bar to stay in university from year 1 into year 2 can actually be very high indeed. And in some European countries, the way a university is seen as a high quality university can actually be how few people are allowed to stay from year 1 into year 2. So just because an entry requirements might seem quite low to a British perspective, doesn't mean there isn't actually a filter taking place at some point. And another thing that we need to be aware of is that there is a difference between the centralised application system that we have in the UK, indeed other countries such as Sweden and Ireland have, and in most cases in Europe, we're going to be talking about a decentralised application system where students have to make their applications directly to individual universities. Now, to delve into some of these in a little bit more detail with commonality across European universities, the first point I want to touch on is this Universities of Applied Sciences against the research universities as two different models of what university can be. The Universities of Applied Sciences are directly linked to a profession that the student is wanting to go into. These will be training students to go into that profession and acquire the competencies and skills that are needed for those things. They typically tend to be a 4-year bachelor's degree because within this program are significant periods of work experience linking to that industry. What we are looking at here then is students who are being taught by working professionals who are getting a practical-based education and are doing subjects which then directly link into that career. For those of you who are maybe used to a British model, I'm not talking about things like hairdressing or beauty or plumbing here. These are still very serious and very well regarded degrees with an academic content to them. And we're talking about subjects like nursing, physiotherapy, teaching, social work, fine art, hospitality, fashion design, and indeed business and communications, but done in an applied sense where the vast majority of the teaching is going to be hands-on, project-based learning and indeed project-based assessment. Now, European universities also have the research universities, which within the UK context may be more what we imagine a university to be, the traditional theoretical academic education. Rather than maybe studying the how you would do something in the University of Applied Sciences system, in a research university, you're going to be studying why you might do something. And this is going to be very heavily based on lectures, on learning theory, on reading books, potentially labs and things on the science side to get a 3-year bachelor's. The people teaching you in a research university will be researchers themselves, typically with a PhD and conducting their own research when they're not lecturing. And these are going to have academic entry requirements based on the secondary school education students had. The sort of subjects we're talking here would be things like philosophy or engineering or history, business in a theoretical way, medicine, the law, and indeed liberal arts and sciences universities, which I'll touch on slightly later. A second thing to bear in mind across the European higher education areas, we do have a difference between comprehensive universities and specialised universities. A comprehensive university is a university that is offering a wide variety of subjects. A university which will have students studying business and students studying engineering, students studying French and so on and so forth. And it is offering a huge variety of subjects to students who are coming there to pick one of the subjects and mix with each other. We do, however, have a range of specialised universities who may only be offering one subject area that they're teaching or 2 or 3 related subject areas. Now, in a comprehensive university, it is going to be recognisably on that British model of a lot of undergraduate students wearing casual clothes, with social facilities, turning up to lectures and classes or doing projects, and mixing with people from all sorts of different subject backgrounds. Whereas in a specialised university, that can be very different. Some of the specialised universities, and particularly some of the business schools in Europe that are offering master's programs and executive education programs and MBAs, may only offer one undergraduate degree in business. And so the balance of the students at that institution is going to be significantly older than it would be where if there were many more undergraduate degrees. And you could potentially find that there may be 300 or 400 students studying a bachelor's in business administration at that university, maybe a couple of thousand students who are on to their second degree, have worked for 10 years and coming back to do some particular training. And the culture of that university is therefore going to be very different. You may find people expected to wear business dress more. It may be in a slightly different style of building. And things like the social life and the accommodation that come with a specialised university are not necessarily going to be the same as if you were studying at a comprehensive university. It's something very important to bear in mind that the European system does have many more of these specialised types of universities, though even though they are called a university, the day in, day out experience of the student studying there may actually be very different than one might first assume. Another thing that's common that needs to be borne in mind is across that university, how widely is English going to be spoken? There are many, many degrees, as I have mentioned, taught at European universities through the medium of English. But there's actually quite a significant difference between going to a university that may be offering 5, 10, 15, 20 or more degrees taught in English, and a university that is offering only one degree taught in English. If you go to a university which is offering one degree taught in English and all the other degrees it's taught are taught in the native language of that country, then you're going to be a relatively small part of that cohort. And therefore, how widely is English going to be spoken across that university? Will the university administration speak English when you are having to pay your fees to deal with academic issues, to possibly deal with any disciplinary issues, to get help with things like finding a doctor, with paying your taxes? Is that going to be something that's going to happen in English? And indeed, with universities which are taking in many, many international students and who are teaching courses in English, you'll find also that there is a growth of things beyond the university also happening in English. If suddenly there is a university that's maybe bringing in a couple of hundred students to study in English, and regardless of whether English is their first language or not, those students are communicating in English, you'll find in the fringes of the universities, at the shops, at the social activities, at the clubs, that the wraparound services beyond the university are also going to start to deliver those services in English. So just because there is a university offering one course, and quite commonly it is typically a business course offered by one university, where everything else is taught in the native language of that country, is that something where actually you can cope without speaking that language? Or are you actually really going to have a high level of conversational fluency within that language just to be able to get through your day-to-day existence at that university? So having now covered some of those basic points, I do want to delve a little bit more into some of the most popular options. And I'll repeat the caveat that I said at the start, that unlike if I was giving a presentation about study in the United States or study in Canada, when I can delve into the minutiae of those particular systems, covering many different systems across Europe, I'm not going to be able to give a huge amount of detail about the particular nuance of each country here. What I hope to give is some overviews of the popular options that students can look at and tend to look at when considering university study in Europe. But my contact details will come up at the end, and therefore please do contact me if you would like to have an individual conversation about anything that I haven't covered today, or indeed more detail about the things that I've covered in overview. So the Netherlands I touched on at the start, and the Netherlands really is one of the most popular options for students around the world looking to get an education taught in English. We're looking now at well over 400 different degrees at Dutch universities taught in English, and that the Netherlands is a country where English is very, very widely spoken. So a couple of key points I want to emphasize about Dutch universities for those who might be considering them. In the Netherlands, we have 3 different types of universities. I've already explained the University of Applied Science system, 4-year, professionally focused, project-based or practical university. And I've touched on the research universities, the theoretical academic 3-year universities. But within the research universities, there's been a development in the Netherlands whereby university colleges have spun out, offering a distinctive type of education, which I think is very attractive to a huge number of students. Now, the university colleges have become almost the honours colleges, or in maybe British terminology, the grammar streams of the research universities. And these are offering liberal arts and science courses following a North American model of retaining academic breadth. So a student who might enter a university college wouldn't be applying to study engineering or business or history. They would be going to study a liberal arts and science degree. And for those students who may be very attracted to the liberal arts model available at universities in North America, but potentially is dissuaded by the distance, the cost, or the complicated application procedures of applying to North America, can find in the Dutch university colleges a more straightforward application system, a university liberal arts experience significantly closer to home, and indeed at a much cheaper cost. A key thing, though, to mention in the Netherlands is the importance of this selection after the gate, that you, particularly at the universities of applied sciences and the research universities, you can find that many programs are open access. By looking on the website's admissions requirements for A-level or BTEC students, you will find requirements that may seem relatively low for what actually are world-class, highly regarded, and potentially very academic and challenging universities. But because of this selection from year 1 into year 2, or selection after the gate, there is a secondary period of selection where students who aren't meeting the thresholds demanded of them by their professors, their tutors, are going to be asked to leave. The Dutch call this a binding study advice, and the joke that I hear all the time from the Dutch is there is nothing advisory about this. The selection after the gate is an important thing to bear in mind. The Dutch universities have done an excellent job of marketing themselves over the last decade with all these different kinds of courses, and it's become a very natural step for students around the world to consider the USA, the UK, Canada, and the Netherlands as their 4 top destinations when they are looking for an English-speaking education. A second area I want to touch on, and one that actually I think many students kind of overlook as an option, is Ireland. Irish universities are part of the ancient universities of the British Isles, and you look back in the history of how universities developed within the British Isles, you will see places like Trinity College Dublin featuring alongside Oxford and Cambridge, St Andrews and Edinburgh. And the Irish universities fit very nicely into a historically British model of universities. And the Irish university experiences in many ways is going to feel very familiar to anyone who has experienced the British university system, both in terms of the way the degrees are structured, in terms of the purposes of selection, and indeed your day-to-day experience when you are there. However, a key thing to understand if you're applying to Ireland is that depending on whether you are an EU or a non-EU citizen, your application procedure is going to be very different. Brexit is the elephant in the room with European universities, and I will touch on that towards the end of the webinar tonight. But for students holding a British passport who are considering applying to Irish universities in the midst of the current uncertainty over Brexit, that is going to present some complications. And the current situation, though, is an EU applicant to Ireland is going to have to apply through a thing called the CAO. And the CAO is a system that is designed to ensure that every student in Ireland who'd like to go to university can go to university. Now, it's very different from saying a student wants to choose which university they can go to, can have that choice. It is based on ensuring that everyone gets a place. And so the CAO has a process coming through into August before courses start in September of matching students to places. So there's a post-qualification application system based on students who have applied in January and have ranked the choices which they wish to make, then being given the sort of highest choice that they might get into based on the results that they have achieved. Now, for EU students who aren't from Ireland, they are also having to go through the system. And actually, over a number of years, that has been a potential disincentive for students to look at Ireland, who may also be holding offers from other countries. Now, for a non-EU student who is applying to Ireland, you don't have to go through that system, and you're able to apply directly to Irish universities and receive your offers within 6 to 8 weeks. So there's a potential change coming here, depending on what happens with Brexit, that may mean that that disincentive to apply to Ireland will be going away. There's also an issue with the equivalencies that the Irish the Irish Universities Association have made between the Irish Leaving Certificate and other qualifications such as A-levels, pre-U, or the International Baccalaureate Diploma, where some of those conversions seem artificially high, and actually when you're looking at the equivalent entry requirements for universities in the UK or Ireland, which might fill the same kind of standard, you can sometimes see that the bar you have to reach to enter somewhere like Trinity College Dublin seems a little unrealistic. Now, again, for non-EU students, that's not necessarily the case, and you can find on university websites that the IB or A-level requirements of a non-EU student can seem significantly lower than for an EU student. So Ireland is a great destination, and potentially actually it may become an easier destination for students looking in the future. Within Europe, we also have private European universities, and this is something that in the UK context we don't really see much of. Universities which are accredited by their national ministries of education, which have a high standard and are having to abide by all the rules and regulations of public universities, but which are running themselves independently and are therefore able to deliver a different style of education. The photo you see here is the new campus of IE University, one of the top ranked private European universities, with very high satisfaction levels, and indeed a significant number of students coming from the UK to study them each year. And this is just an example of many other excellent private European universities, which increasing numbers of students from the UK are considering. The advantage of going to a private European university as opposed to a public one is that because you are paying a bit more money to go there, you are able to have a different kind of university experience than some public universities are able to fund and therefore provide. Things like clubs, like dorms, like student services, like smaller class sizes, like career services, like internships and work experience. Private European universities, because they are a little bit more consumer driven, are able to provide from the funds they are charging to students. Now, when we say private European universities, we are talking about a fee they're charging here, but this fee could be around 10,000 euros, potentially up to 25 or 30,000 euros, and in some very small examples, more than that. But it's not an unreasonably high figure actually compared to tuition within the United Kingdom. And so there's a whole suite of private universities, including my example here, IE in Spain, where the student experience you're going to find there will actually be recognizably similar to what you would find in the UK in terms of the level of support services beyond the classroom that these universities are able to provide. But equally, many students are looking at the public university system, whereby the cost of tuition can be very, very low, under €1,000, or indeed in some circumstances, it's non-existent. There is no cost of tuition at all. The university you see in front of you is KU Leuven in Belgium. This is the historic library in one of the main squares of Leuven. And these public universities are a great option for students who potentially are very independent, are able to cope on their own. If they are going to a public university that may offer that one course in English and everything else in taught in the native language, they may indeed have some facility with that language already, so they're able to cope within the wider community. And the public universities around Europe, indeed perhaps with the exception of the Netherlands and Ireland, are typically larger with very, very large lectures and class sizes, and not necessarily able to offer some of these things that the private universities can do, such as clubs and career services, internships, and importantly, as I mentioned earlier, student accommodation. These public universities are the ones based on this tradition of accessibility, where students who have met a minimum academic threshold of eligibility are able then to go to university. Indeed, in some countries, you turn up on the first day of university, present your academic qualifications, such as your A-levels or your BTEC, and are almost given a free choice of what subject you would like to take. The idea in many of the public university systems is that you have a right as a taxpayer or a child of a taxpayer to go to university. What you choose to do with that is up to you. And these are the university systems where you can find those very significant rates where not many students are making it from year one into year two. Another option that many students, when they look at Europe, consider are the American universities abroad. And these are universities following an American model of education and indeed accredited by some of the American accrediting organizations, but which are based in Europe. You can find in many countries around Europe the American University of a particular place, the American University of Paris and the American University of Rome as two examples. The American Universities Abroad website lists many, many of these programs, not only in Europe, but indeed around the world, where a student who's wanting to access that American style of education, very different philosophy based on breadth, based on flexible assessment, based on majors, minors, electives, and distribution requirements, you can get that academic experience within Europe. Typically at a cheaper cost, and actually in many ways giving a slightly more diverse student body, because the reason why students might be accessing American universities abroad could be for financial or personal reasons. They're not able to travel to the United States and get that degree. Some of these universities are incredibly highly regarded, offering particularly strong programs in areas that might make sense in the part of the world that they are. I think here of the American University of Rome, which has very strong reputation in things like classics and archaeology, given the city in which it is based. Some of these American universities abroad are indeed branch campuses of some US universities. So you can find universities like Suffolk, which has campus in Madrid, but its home base is in Boston. St. Louis University, which also has a campus in Madrid, and Bard College, which has a campus in Berlin, but is based in New York, offering full degree programs in the American model based in Europe, but also linking to their home campus in the United States. Another area of many students who are looking at studying in Europe will look at is hospitality. And the photo you see in front of you is 4 students at the École Hôtelière de Lausanne, known as one of the world's top hospitality management schools. And Switzerland does dominate in this sector, though indeed there are options in the Netherlands and Ireland which are very well regarded as well. And hospitality is a great option for students to consider, particularly those students who the traditional academic way of being taught, of being assessed, may not suit them. And École Hôtelière de Lausanne and Glion and Les Roches, which are the 3 most well-known Swiss hospitality schools within the UK, are delivering an education which is focusing on students' soft skills. The students that you will see on the screen now are all dressed in business dress, because students at these universities are expected to turn up to class in business dress. And students who want to go into a service-oriented career, be that running 5-star hotels, luxury resorts, private banking, high-end fashion and luxury goods, can find in the hospitality sector, particularly in Switzerland, some really excellent options. Hospitality within the UK can sometimes be associated with things like bar work and waitering and catering. And actually within the European scene, hospitality is seen as this high-end profession leading to things like, say, private banking and luxury hotels. And if you have students at your school, a son or daughter, or indeed you're a student on the call now, and actually you have wonderful soft skills, you are that sort of student who will always be the first person to give a tour for prospective students at your school. You are able to solve problems between your friends. You are that problem-solving person. Then these kind of universities are looking for you as a way of taking you forwards and giving you the background to work in that industry, so you can go off and be that manager of the Ritz-Carlton or the Four Seasons or a Rothschild branch or a Cartier store, and have a wonderful career using those soft skills to deliver a service experience to consumers. And then within Europe, we also have another option here, which is gaining quite a lot of currency, of what we call 2+2 or 1+3 options. The slide you see in front of you is taken from the Sciences Po website, and Sciences Po is a university in France, teaching a number of courses in English. And Sciences Po have created a suite of international dual degrees where students will spend 2 years at one of the Sciences Po campuses in France and then finish off their degree with 2 years at one of the partner universities here. So a student can spend 2 years in France and then spend their final 2 years in New York, in California, in Germany, Hong Kong, and you see those on the screen here. And an awful lot of universities now have these 2+2 programs where it's combining study in Europe with study in another part of the world. Trinity College Dublin and Columbia have a famous model. Lancaster and St Andrews universities in the UK have similar partnerships with universities in North America. Indeed, within Europe, there are 2+2 programs where students can mix and match between universities as well. And then a slight variation on that is the 1+3 option, whereby students can choose to spend their first year of a degree in Europe and then potentially their final 3 years at another university. This is most commonly seen from North American universities who do have branch campuses or study abroad centers, where students from Loyola University in Chicago may spend their first year at their branch campus in Rome and then transition to the United States for their final 3 years. Now, for students who may be looking to do something slightly more exotic, but the idea of spending your entire time in North America or Canada or Australia or Japan feels a long way away to go at the age of 18 or 19, but maybe by your early 20s, you can cope with that kind of idea. There's a great option here. Also, for some of these partnership arrangements, some of them will be charging European tuition levels for the time in Europe and North American tuition levels for the time in North America. And so therefore, if you are looking to get a North American experience, but don't necessarily have the funding to cover a 4-year degree in North America, this can be a cost-effective way for students to get that experience. Another option for students who are looking in Europe, and one that is becoming increasingly important as we look at issues to do with recruitment into the health sciences in the UK, is for students to study things like medicine, like dentistry and veterinary sciences at universities across Europe. I put an example here of Queen Mary University of London's Malta campus. It's actually a campus on Gozo, whereby students are getting a British accredited medical school degree, but they are studying it in Europe. And that is one of a number of different options that students can take. There are other English-speaking countries who are teaching medicine, Ireland and Cyprus, for example, where students can go and study at medical schools there. But indeed, across Central, Eastern and Southern Europe, there are universities teaching health science courses taught in English for the duration of those degrees in countries where English is not the native language. Now, there are some particular challenges in these processes, and it's important to emphasize when talking about this that these are not easier degrees. Medicine, dentistry, vet sciences should always be hard degrees, but the selection procedures will work in different ways. And for students who are determined to go into the health sciences and find, for whatever reason, in the UK application, it doesn't quite work out for them, these pathways can be very, very important. If you are, however, going to be studying particularly medicine or dentistry in a non-English speaking country, it's important to bear in mind that at some point in that degree, you are going to have to reach a level of fluency in order to engage with the patients with which you are dealing. Now, some of these courses are incredibly well regarded and in very historic universities, for example, Charles University in Prague. And if you do want to have a career in medicine to be able to go and study that degree, pass the same exam to come back for work in the NHS as a British student leaving a British medical school would have to do, this can be an important pathway. But for those students who are particularly looking at things like medicine and dentistry, please be aware that there are some of the challenges with having to learn a new language in here. And indeed, unlike a student maybe going for a 3 or 4 year degree, you are committing to a significant period of time for life in another country. Now, I said that Brexit is the elephant in the room, and I will just touch on it because it would be remiss of me not to when talking about European universities at the time at which this webinar is being recorded. And I'm afraid that I have to say at the moment that until we know what the exact situation and whether there will be a deal, a no deal, indeed no Brexit, it's very hard to comment on what the situation will be. And the assumption that there might be a transition arrangement, then again, for universities, particularly for fees, that transition arrangement will enable there to be time when new arrangements are going to be worked out. And those of us working in this field will expect that there will be some kind of situation whereby students from the UK applying to European universities might find themselves in the new category, not EU, not non-EU, but some kind of new category, perhaps depending on what trade deals are done. In the context of a no deal, however, there will be no transition period. And depending on the internal laws and workings of a country's university system, you could find that on the day that no deal happens, fees could change from EU to non-EU on that very day. More and more will come out as it becomes clear as what the situation is going to be. And individual universities and countries which have websites promoting their city or their country as a destination do have pages explaining some of the nuances here. But if you are a student, a parent of a student, or an advisor of a student here looking at this, it's important to understand that really at the moment we don't know what the situation is going to be, and to keep an eye on developments and visit universities' websites and indeed speak to universities to see, as it becomes clear, what things may or may not happen, what that might mean for students looking to go through these processes. And hopefully that's been a good overview of some of the key themes, destinations and topics for students looking at European universities. And the purpose of this webinar is to give information, and those of you here hopefully have benefited from that. But I do need to mention my services and the services of the organisations that I work with, that we do support students with these processes. We are accredited both by the International Association of College Admissions Counsellors and affiliated consultants to County International Schools. And we work with schools and students to support students with international university applications going through this process. If you do like to find more information, if you're interested in having a follow-up conversation, my contact details are on the screen now. Please do get in touch, book an appointment through my online booking system, by email, or send me a WhatsApp call. It would be an absolute pleasure to have a conversation with anyone here to talk about European university applications in more detail, what wonderful futures there might be out there for students. So that concludes the webinar. Thank you very much for your time this evening, your participation, and I look forward to hearing from some of you in due course.